The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie was not awful. That's obviously not a standard, but it was better than average. I describe it in a similar fashion to Across the Spider-Verse. It's pretty good, somewhat weighed down by the typical ESG agenda nonsense, but it's pretty fun. Not as well crafted as Spider-Man, but well crafted nonetheless. Let's address the elephant in the room, and no, I'm not talking about the politics. The art style. The art style is interesting, but the designs are not necessarily. The biggest example being April O'Neil. If there was an elephant in the room, that'd be her. Okay, let's talk about politics. She was never black. All women had perms back in the day. Stop trying to stretch things and be dishonest. Now, back to our regular schedule. The style has this rough sketchiness to it. If you look at the moon, for example, you can see it's drawn in crayon. The characters are deformed like something out of a Burton movie, you know, the German Expressionism. If you played Psychonauts or watched Real Monsters, you would know what I'm talking about. What's truly bad though is the choices in the designs. April is a black, fat ginger. She almost looks like the fifth turtle. Any worse and she would have been left-handed too. Across the Spider-Verse is pretty good visually, but did you really want a pregnant Spider-Woman? Did you really want of all influences from Spider-Verse to be that? Really? The art is good, but the designs are terribly chosen in some places. For as excited as I was for the Turtles, I immediately recoiled when I saw April. The movie in general is slightly brought down by this aspect. No, it's not super woke, it's somewhat enjoyable, but you can smell the politics in it. It's in the air. You could say also that there's certain red flags. Okay, now on to the positive. The movie does have a decent sense of humor. Some jokes were pushed too far. One went from being funny to bad to funny again, but overall it's fun. And okay, yeah, there were maybe too many references. Who cares about Mark fucking Ruffalo? What's even more fun are the fight scenes. Westerners were terrible for a long time at making fight scenes, unless it's John Wick. It's really Hong Kong cinema that managed to do good fight scenes and that eventually carried over to the West. Here, you could tell that Westerners made the fight scenes, but instead of making terrible fight scenes of what they think fights should be or trying to copy one-to-one Hong Kong, they just went with a more creative, improvised, chaotic style for the turtle. There's a lot of improvisation, and that's fine because they can't make combat properly, so they just went for whatever, something creative. And that ended up being something really fun because now, as someone who knows about fighting, I'm not constantly trying to pick it apart, and as a fan of Hong Kong movies, I'm not trying to constantly take it apart. There is a hint of Hong Kong cinema. Wait a minute, there's a Chinese spy in my house. I didn't say anything about Hong Kong, I just mentioned it. Fuck off. So as I was saying, there's some really deep cuts in there. 36 Chambers of the Shaolin, Snake in the Eagle's Shadow, they know their stuff. The music too was well chosen. Again, I'll refer to Spider-Verse, but there's some good selection. There's some Biggie in there, and that's always a good choice. I guess it's the new meta of animated movies, putting some Biggie in it. I also almost failed to mention that the soundtrack was composed by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross of Nine Inch Nail fame. That explains why the rest of the soundtrack, the non-licensed music, is pretty good. There is a good variation of instruments, from piano to synthesizers. It's really well chosen and reflects the mood of each scene perfectly. The slower paced piano of Sewer Home, for example, really sells that idea of nostalgia and sadness, but at the same time having a comfortable place where you feel welcomed. The progression is intertwined with major notes, which makes the entire thing also feel really positive and uplifting at the same time. And the distortion in the instrumentation also brings the distance that exists in the sound, brings the same distance that you would have with long forgotten memory. The soundtrack is legitimately well composed. There was a great deal of effort put in that movie in every aspect. That's why I enjoyed it somewhat. I enjoyed it pretty well. More on that later. In regard to the turtles themselves and Splinter, Splinter looks like a weird hobo, and there were some last minute changes with him. I suppose that explains why he turns out competent in the end. The turtles are just well designed enough. There's two extremes with the usual design philosophy of the turtles. Either they all look the same, or they're too different. Here it's almost too much in the latter, but they're close enough that it's not an issue. The style is good, but again, some choices in regards to the designs are weird and politically driven in some aspects. There was definitely some restraint in not putting Shredder and keeping him for sequel bait. Will I be there for a sequel though? Probably not. The movie had a fun narrative and some okay storytelling at some points, but I know the drill by now. I recognize the signs, the flags. This is what I meant by I enjoyed the film somewhat. 10 years ago I would have paid no heed to it. These things are actually pretty inconspicuous enough, out of context, but now I know what they mean. Splinter was an analog for being a straight racist white man and is only redeemed by becoming gay at the end, which was redacted, by the way. They removed that in the final version because they knew nobody would want to watch the fucking movie if they kept it. Leonardo is in love with April. She's so cool, guys, the black fat woman. She almost looks like us. The sequel will be turbo garbage, you know it. You know the drill. If you don't, you're dishonest. You make a first one, you make it pretty decent or good, you put some light woke elements, and then in the sequel you fucking turbocharge it, and then you put fat, black, pregnant women everywhere on motorcycles, and you make everything gay. I enjoyed it somewhat, but as I said, I can see the red flags, and I know where this is going to go. There's no way you don't know at this point, even normies know. If you really insist, Timmy, you can have your second helping of slop. You can have mine. Oh my god.